Okay, so now we're moving into the second book in your course, Families Without Fathers by David Pogno. This is an unusual book. Pogno is one of the very few social scientists who has written about the effects on the family when we have fathers who are missing. Most social scientists refuse to approach this topic. They don't really want to write about it. They don't want to address the research about it. It's really kind of a topic that people don't want to go near. And Pogno is one of the very few scientists who has been writing about it for decades. Most textbooks that you read in your psychology course and your development courses are biased in favor of single families and single mothers. And they really won't talk about the devastating effects on children who are raised without a father. And so I want to make sure that you get exposure to research that covers what happens to people when they don't have a father and the topic of fatherlessness in our country. So that's why we're looking at this book. So we're kind of approaching it backwards a little bit. So we're going to do chapters 5 and 6 and then go to do chapters 1 and 2 in the book. And what I want you to pay attention to are research findings, not so much someone's opinion, but what kind of facts is he using to support claims that he makes. So the question here in chapter 5, what is it that fathers do? And so as you read the book, again, this is not a book like you think textbook is. Your textbook is very reader friendly and has the content really easy to access. This one's going to be harder to access because it's kind of written in kind of a plain format. So you really need to kind of dig into it and use some questions to try to approach an active reading method. So I'll try to help you here with this in this slideshow here, but try to look for answers to questions as you read through the chapter itself. So what is it that fathers do? Well, basically in this chapter, what he's going to explain to you is that what fathers do is they protect and to provide. And so initially, way back, we've got fathers providing, because of their physical strength, physical protection. But physical protection from what? And so see if you can find answers to that question. And of course, right now, we're not having to be protected from the wolves in the jungle. What is it that fathers are giving protection from? And so see if you can find how he addresses that question. Certainly historically, there's protection, but today, in the world that we live in right now, what kinds of protection would two parents be providing for us? And what kind of protection would a male parent or a father figure provide to children? Provision is a little bit easier to answer. There's economic provision. Certainly two breadwinners. A father has historically been the person being the breadwinner. And of course, as we've studied families, we now know that we've got two breadwinners. We've got a mom in the family who's also a career person in the family, and she's bringing in provision. Historically, it's been the father doing that. But now we have two breadwinners in the family, two people who are bringing in economic provision. What other kind of provision does the father provide? He's providing a psychological kind of provision. And how is his psychological provision, how is his psychological support and that kind of provision, how is that different than the kind that your mom is providing to you? So see if you can explore that in the chapter and see if you can figure out an answer to that question. What is it that he is uniquely providing that no one else in the family is providing? See if you can find answers to those questions. What unique contributions do fathers make? Well, there's role models, and especially role models for males in the family, and especially as males get older and move into adolescence. So see if you can make some lists as you dig into the chapter about some specifics, and specifically look for some research findings about what is it that that fathers are providing, and especially for males as far as the role models go. Look in the chapter for some research findings about parenting styles. How is it that fathers provide a different kind of parenting style that mothers don't provide? And how do they complement one another as parents in a family? And so that if you don't have a father, what are you going to be missing out on? For instance, fathers provide children practice in regulating their emotions. That's an example here that mothers don't provide. And so how do people learn how to regulate their emotions? Because they have a father in the family. Fathers provide help with learning how to engage in competition, how to take risks, how to live independently, how to practice independence. They learn different kinds of discipline than they learn from their mother. Look those up. Look for examples of those and research findings for those in the chapter. What we call this basically is the sophisticated word for it here is gender differentiated parenting. And so if you have a single sex parent, if you just have your mom, and remember single parents are mostly moms, if that's what you have, then you're not getting gender differentiated parenting. And so look up, what do we mean by communion and what do we mean by agency? So what do those two terms mean? What kinds of interaction are you getting with your dad that you're not going to get with if you just have your mom? What kinds of parenting interaction do you get from him simply because, not because of his personality, not because of the unique personality that your dad has. We're not talking about that. We're talking about the fact that he's a male. And so what is it that males bring to the table that females don't bring to the table? It's not because there's anything wrong with your mom. It's simply because males bring something unique to the table. And so you have this really unique experience as a child having both sexes in your family. And so what is he allowing you to do? This is what we mean by agency. What is he allowing you to experience and do and practice simply because you have a male parent in the home? So look those terms up and see if you can come up with some examples. And of course, when Pogno provides you some research findings, that always adds support. We don't want to just have Pogno's opinion. We want to have some research that he has to support unique contributions that fathers make. Again, this is important because you're not going to get this in other textbooks and in other social science that you read because there's a bias against fatherhood. There has been for several decades now. Father involvement in child outcomes. Look for that in the chapter. Father involvement in child. So when the father is involved in children's lives and upbringing, what happens? How do we measure that? So what we do is we look at children's lives, we look at outcomes, look at academic development, look at emotional development, and we see, well, what does it produce? And so what we find is it's especially important for older children as they move into adolescence, especially for older male adolescent children. Intellectual competence and academic achievement is more improved for older children. We can measure that in older children when they have an involved father in their life. We find that children who have an involved father score higher on empathy tests, what we call pro-social behavior. They have more meaningful friendships. They're involved in social activities in school. They are able to exhibit and describe empathetic interactions in school and in their social life. Basically, their psychological well-being is more well-rounded. simply because they've got an involved father in their life. That's not necessarily an either or. What we do is we measure how involved is the father in your life. So there are some children who have absolutely no father at all, period. He has disappeared and they are being raised maybe by another family member or a single mom, period. Then you have some children who have a father who visits, and he comes and he's a regular visitor, but he doesn't live at home, and so he's a visiting father. You have some children who have a close relationship with a stepfather, and so he's living there in the home, but it's a stepfather arrangement. Remember back a survey I showed you in a previous PowerPoint about engagement, and engagement with step parents is typically not quite as strong as it is with biological parents. But anyway, you've got a step parent that can be involved, a father involved in your life, and then you've got your biological father who's there. So there's a range of involvement here, and so as we measure that, the more involved the father is, from not at all to all the way to the other end of the spectrum to a completely involved biological father, the psychological well-being of children increases and gets stronger and stronger and stronger. You can have a biological father who's there in the home and he's completely uninvolved in your life. He's busy with his career, remember, and not involved. So physically having somebody there doesn't necessarily equal involvement. And so we measure that, and then we see how does that correlate with the psychological well-being of children. And so he writes in this chapter and compares biological fathers with stepfathers. And so that's an important section in this chapter. Please go read that, and please look at that, and please see the difference. It was thought at one time, well, stepfathers are a good replacement. Well, are they really? What does the research tell us? And so please look at the research here, and then look at some research from the Pew survey that I showed you earlier about stepfathers are better than nothing, but stepfathers are not a substitute for real fathers. And so real fathers who run off and leave their kids behind shouldn't feel like a stepfather is a good replacement. It's really not. So please look at the research here at the engagement and disengagement. Typically, step-parents are much more disengaged from their stepchildren than they are from their natural biological children. So look at this research. Look at this part in that chapter. Look at the relationship between fathers and then teen delinquency and violence. And of course, since many of you are going into criminal justice careers, this is an important part of the chapter for you to pay attention to. Missing fathers and disengaged stepfathers. There's a strong correlation to that and later teen delinquency and violent behavior. There's a connection between early social experiences that kids have, or lack of social experiences with their natural fathers. They don't develop social control. They don't develop empathy, and so that leads to delinquency and violent behavior later on, because they don't have that empathy. They don't have those feelings that they need that causes self-control later on. They're trying to make connections with peer groups that oftentimes are deviant peer groups because they don't have connections at home with a father figure, positive role models at home. Just having a second adult in the home, like a stepfather, we don't find research that tends to support that that's a good replacement or that that's better than nothing. There's a term here that I wish you would look up and put it in your vocabulary, especially if you're going into criminal justice. The term is called protest masculinity. Adolescent males tend to engage, who don't have a father figure, a biological father figure, tend to engage in what we call protest masculinity. And what they do is they overcompensate with violent masculine behaviors because they're missing this masculine role model in their life as they grew up. They're missing that discipline. They're missing those boundary setting that masculine role model did for them as they grew up. And so they're wanting that. They don't know that's what they want, but they're wanting that and they're missing it. And so they act out as adolescents. And so I really urge you to look at number 5 here and look for that and read about that in this chapter. And then even later on in some of your criminal justice papers that you have to write, in some of your other courses, this would be something very interesting for you to pursue and look up protest masculinity and see if you could do some further research on this. It would be very interesting for you in a criminology course or a juvenile delinquency course. There's a section in here about fathers, the relationship between fathers, having a father or not having a father, and then unwed teen pregnancy and childbearing. Fathers who are engaged, if you have a father at home, if you have a father who is engaged, who's in your life, maybe he is, maybe you have a single mom, but you have a father, a divorced father, but he is engaged in your life. You know, that counts for something. That what that does is it tends to produce what we call an internal locus of control. And so that's really good in producing a higher degree of self-control in your life. And so you are not as prone to engage in out of control behaviors like teen pregnancy is. Teen pregnancy tends to be something that teenagers engage in, and they, later on they look back at what was I thinking, what was I doing? I was trying to get some attention, or I wasn't thinking about what I was doing. I was drinking, or I was on drugs, and I didn't realize what I was doing sexually, and they were just kind of out of control. Their life was out of control. Well, what we find is that teenagers who have a relationship with their father don't tend to engage in that kind of behavior as much. They tend to have more of an internal kind of self-control mechanism, and they're able to watch what they do and pay more attention to what they do. That's what we call an internal locus of control. Unreliable males. I want you to look this up. Look up the relationship between unreliable males and a reproductive strategy that's going on. That's very interesting. I would be curious to know what you think about that. Teenagers who grow up, teenage females who grow up with unreliable males in their life tend to engage in an early reproductive strategy very early in their life as a means of trying to corner or snag a more reliable male in their life. And so look at the research on this in the textbook, and I'm just really curious to know what you think about this. It'd be neat to see if you could work this into a discussion this week. Also, finally, in this section, too much stress in people's lives, in female lives, tends to produce, we think maybe it might tend to produce an early onset of puberty. In other words, young preteen girls who are experiencing too much stress from whatever. Maybe it's an economic stress, maybe it's anxiety from too much violence in the home. It can be from anywhere. What we tend to see is an early onset of puberty. The jury is still out a little bit as to what really is the cause of that, but many scientists think it might be caused by too much stress. And of course, you could imagine when you have a broken home and you have a father missing and you've got an economic collapse in the house, you can imagine the kind of levels of stress that kids are experiencing. So looked at it. That's another interesting phenomena. And again, when you're looking at the onset of deviant behavior and even maybe delinquency, here you go. And then finally, at the end of the chapter, just the general status of women and father involvement. So when your father is not involved in the family, what happens to just the status of women? The mom, the teenage girls in the family, what happens to them? And this is kind of silly. I put number one, duh, when dad's more involved in the family, there's not as much work for everybody to do because, the division of labor is going on. And so he's working and he's bringing in a paycheck. And so there's not as much work to do. Well, when he's gone, right? I mean, you don't need to go to college to know this. This is true. When he's gone, there's a lot more work that mom has to do. She maybe has to get 2 jobs to make ends meet. Maybe teenagers have to get jobs after school to help pay the bills, right? So when dad's more involved, and that, he can be a parent who's gone. He can be divorced, but if he's making financial contributions to the home, if he's paying child support, he's involved a little bit more. It's easing the workload. But if he's a disappeared dad, that's adding to the workload of everybody in the family. And the status of women is really what Pogno is talking about in this chapter. Are there teenage boys and even teenage girls having to work more at home and sometimes getting engaged in illegal work? When dad is at home and mom is able to have some more time on her hands because there's a dad at home, you've got both parents, mom's public status is raised. This is interesting. Look at this. She has more time to get involved in the school. She has more time to get involved in the neighborhood. She has more time to get involved at church because she's not having to work her tail off. So it raises her public status when dad is involved at home. It's very interesting. You've got a mom who's more hands-on when dad is involved. So when dad disappears, mom is more hands-off. And that's not good for anybody. Of course, number 3 is pretty obvious. More money, more time, more attention when dad's there. When dad's physically there, when he's living at home, sure. But if dad's not living at home, when he's making child support, when he's checking in, when he knows what's going on, that helps tremendously. When dad's involved, women have more power when men are involved in the child. So when dad's involved in child rearing, in other words, when he's involved in disciplining the kids, when he's involved in making decisions, women tend to have they're more empowered because dad tends to support. They're working together collectively to make decisions about what's the right thing for their kids to do or to not do. And she feels more empowered. She doesn't feel like she's the bad cop and he's the good cop. What happens when parents divorce or when they separate is they tend to play one another off of each other. And mom, the one who's living at home and managing the day-to-day, she tends to feel like the bad cop oftentimes, and she's the bad guy. And it puts her in really bad situations, and she's not empowered very much. When dad's more involved and he's a physical presence there in the home, it empowers her more, and it's good for her more. So this is a really interesting last part of the chapter. I encourage you to look at it and read it and take some notes. And this works better when you apply it to your own life and apply it to some of your own experiences and take some notes and write about it in a personal way. You will learn it deeper when you do it that way. Again, these chapters in the Pogno book are harder to read because there's no pictures, there's no charts, there's no graphs. It's just straight narration. And so you're going to have to take some notes in the book and underline and write stuff in it. Please write in your book. That's how people do college. That's what they do. So please don't hesitate to do that. That's how you're supposed to do your college books. Write in them. As you go through this, if you have questions, please let me know. Please let me help you read this and get the content out of it that you need to get. And see what you can connect to the discussion this week in this. Let me know if you got a question. Send me an email and jump into the next chapter as soon as you can.